Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of FreeThought Hour. Now, as you know, my co-host, Tercia, is in South Africa, and she sometimes has what they call load shedding. We would call it a power cut, but there you go. And I don't think she's got that tonight, but she's still having difficulty of a technical nature. And when she came on before the show began, we couldn't hear her. So she's off trying to fix her microphone, and hopefully she'll join us later. Oh, here she comes. Let's see. Can we hear you now? Tercia, can we hear you now? No, we can't hear you. Oh, dear. What is going on? So I'll let you work. Oh, we heard a squeak.
Does it sound?
Yes, we've got you.
Okay.
So I don't know why. Welcome.
It's a good thing I wasn't on sound because I was swearing.
Was that in Afrikaans?
No, I normally swear in English. I won't swear now, but I swear in English. I prefer swearing in English.
It's a very good language to swear from. Yes, I agree.
As good as any. As good as any.
Yes,
as good as any. How are you doing, Don? Have we started?
We have. Yes, you're in the show, and it's going out right now. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Should we introduce our guest?
Please, let's do. I'm sorry I was crawling underneath tables and I've been rebuked and reprimanded by my husband, who was my faithful assistant with his phone torch. Thank you, Donnie.
Okay, good. Well, you're okay because the camera wasn't showing your bottom.
No, it's on the other side of the table. Well, we might get some more viewers, you know. You never know. Porn is.
It takes all sorts, I suppose. Yes. So our guest tonight, it's Linda Russell, who's a very interesting person with a very interesting story to tell. We'll be talking about vegetarianism and about a rather unpleasant experience she's had with Christianity, and finding out about her life story as well. Here she is.
I'm looking forward.
Linda, welcome. How the devil are you?
I'm good, and thank you for having me on and inviting me, John and Tercia. Lovely to be here.
It's lovely. Great. We're glad you're better. You were ill. Are you well again?
Yes, I was ill when we planned this podcast the first time. I actually completely lost my voice, and it was so inconvenient. So I'm much better now. I'm fine, thank you.
That's fantastic.
We're glad you're better. It's when you've lost your voice, you can't just correct it by plugging it in again, can you? Like Tercia's done with her microphone.
You really can't. I couldn't speak at all. I had to whisper, and even whispering hurt my throat. Anyway, enough of that. It was very tedious, and I'm glad to be over it.
And you're in the Cayman Islands, aren't you? Tell us about that.
I am. Both of my daughters live abroad. My younger daughter lives in Florida. She's a psych medic there, and my elder daughter lives and works in Cayman. She's been here a year and a half, and I've been here for a month now, and I'm going next week actually back home. But Cayman is, if you haven't been to Cayman, it's a country really worth going to. It's lovely here, about 29 degrees at the moment, and I'm about 2:30 in the afternoon here.
Yes.
So we're 6 hours behind the UK.
Yes.
But it's a lovely place, white sand and palm trees and warmth.
And well, the nearest I've been,
island, everybody's pleasant.
The nearest I've been is the Bahamas, where I think I spent, was it one night, maybe two, and in a little excursion from Florida. So, and of course that also has white sand and the same sort of temperature. But it's too hot for me. I don't like 29. No.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like the heat. I quite like it actually, and I like to be able to swim in the seas, nice and warm.
Yeah, it's very humid. It's very humid as well.
Yes, it is humid. Yeah. And I don't mind that too much. Okay. Everywhere indoors is air conditioned, of course, but it's rather nice at night time, sitting outside with a cocktail. That's very nice any time of night. All you have to do is be careful to put lots of mozzie spray on, because
Yes.
mosquitoes are a problem here, and I'm guessing in the Bahamas as well.
Yes, they are. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, I've just come back from France, so I've had quite an exhausting time with 3 children on my own, and a lot of driving. France is so big, you know. It needs condensing. There's far too much space between the places. We could do without the gaps, you know. Put the places closer together, and that'll be much more enjoyable.
Well, I will. I think I need to say that I'm just in the most beautiful place in the world, which is the Breda Valley, close to Cape Town, and we had a lovely. I'm not a vegetarian, Linda, but I'm very keen to have a discussion about that because we had a good old-fashioned South African braai with meat and mealie meal pap and our speciality, and we're moving into our summer. So at the moment it's lovely because it's about it's 22 degrees outside, not too many mosquitoes, no wind blowing tonight, and it's lovely. So yeah, I think it's not as humid as the Caymans, and I lived on the northeast coast of KZN, which gets really really hot and humid. So I don't like that. So but I'm glad you're having a good time and preparing to go back to a cold England.
I know, I'm not looking forward to it, but fortunately, in early December, I'm going to Florida because I gave up
Oh,
work a couple of years ago. I'm going to Florida to stay with my younger daughter.
oh,
And then after Christmas, I'm coming back to Cayman. So
Oh wow, lucky
that'll be
lady.
fun. I hate English weather, and I think for me, the worst months are January and February. So
oh.
I'm staying away until the end of February. Then I'll go back for March. So
Well, we've
So,
got
so you're
17 degrees here right now, and it's evening, so that's
that's
very mild.
pleasant.
yeah,
That's
that's
very
not bad.
pleasant.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pleasant. So you're
Anyway,
a swallow, Linda. You're a swallow. You follow the
yes.
seasons and you sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, Linda, I bigged you up by telling everybody what an interesting person you are, because you have had this quite this journey through life, which has been quite unusual, haven't you? So tell us a bit about that.
Right, where to start? Such a loaded question. Well, I grew up in a very working class home. I went to a normal state school in the UK, in London, actually. I'm a Londoner.
Hmm.
And I had a normal upbringing, happy upbringing. Not a lot of money, but a happy upbringing. And I can go straight into becoming vegetarian because I still remember today exactly how that happened. Basically, I thought meat was just food, the same as potatoes and vegetables. I thought it was just food. And it was only when I went to school when I was 5 that something happened in school. One of the teachers started talking about it, that I suddenly heard that meat wasn't just food, it was actually dead animal flesh and the insides of animals. And of course, I was so horrified at this, I didn't actually believe it. I thought they were having me on. So I went home to my lovely mum and I said, Mum, it's not true, is it, that meat is dead animal flesh? And my mum, bless her, went, well, kinda, yes. Anyway, I was absolutely horrified and mortified at the thought of this. I was just appalled by it. And in a nutshell, I couldn't eat it again. It wasn't a choice. I couldn't physically put it in my mouth. I was so horrified as to what it was.
Oh,
I actually
Linda,
couldn't
can I
believe,
ask
and
you?
still, 60 years later, I still find it appalling that people can kill and eat beautiful creatures, and their insides. And
I
I
want to.
never got my head around. And I do know, by the way, Tersia, about brides. I dated a South African guy once, and I remember those. And
I want to ask you, Linda.
I know a lot of people enjoy meat, but I don't know if as meat eaters, if you can understand where I'm coming from. It sounds odd, perhaps, but for me, it was the obvious thing. So it's not just, and I can go into it, it's not just the morality side of it. I can't bear cruelty to animals. I can't bear to see pigs being kept in pens and animals being pretty much tortured. And in some countries, of course, I'm thinking particularly of parts of China, animals are literally deliberately tortured. For example, they skin dogs because, in some parts of China, not all over China, because it's believed that the agony suffered by the dog and the fear makes the meat taste better.
Oh,
I know, pretty horrific stuff, huh? So I'm not suggesting, obviously, we do that kind of thing here.
Linda, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
How old were you when you realized that meat comes from animals?
5.
That's very young. Wow.
Yeah, and I don't know why, because I don't think I was a particularly sensitive child, but it just dawned on me. And the funny thing is, my parents were very traditional. It was a kind of meat and 2 veg type dinners. So and nobody had put the idea, and I don't honestly think the word vegetarian was used in those days. I think I was a child who didn't eat meat. And it was such an odd thing at the time. My poor mom was worried about me because her neighbours used to say, oh, that's worrying about young Linda. She's going to get rickets. She's going to be ill. Well, fortunately, I've had a life of good health, but then I do make sure I eat well. But so as the years went by, I actually got firmer in my beliefs, and I knew I would never eat meat again. And that includes fish as well. I feel the same about fish. So for all of my life, I was vegetarian. I have been vegetarian. And a few years ago, I actually bit the bullet and went completely vegan. But leading up to that, I've always been a bit uncomfortable with drinking cow's milk. And I've always been uncomfortable with the concept of eggs. For me, they always kind of reminded me of a fetus. And I was always uncomfortable with cow's milk. I don't like the hormones and the mucus in cow's milk. And of course, as the years went by and I did a lot more research, I find that, of course, some cows, they're taken away from their cows, obviously, so that we can have the milk. And a lot of baby male cows are just dumped on a tip. And that sort of thing is ghastly to me and appalling. So I gave that up a few years ago. And now I drink all alternative milks, almond milk, coconut milk. Oat milk is actually my favourite. And I used to love cheese. That was the only thing I miss. I used to love camembert cheese and Edam and cheddar. But that was a small price to pay. And the one thing I have to admit is that vegan cheese is ghastly. But that's a small price to pay. So a few years ago, I thought, no, I can't do this anymore. Trying and eating the odd egg, but pretending it wasn't an egg by scrambling it. So a few years ago, I went completely vegan, and now I have a whole plant-based diet, and I'm very happy with that. The only downside to it that I see, it's good for your health, it's good for your skin. I've done a lot of research into it. It's good for the environment. The only downside is on a very practical level. When you're out and about in some countries, particularly, there aren't many restaurants. There aren't that many restaurants that serve vegan food. Here in Cayman, there are 3, which isn't bad. They're getting more progressive. But I'm going, for example, to see my niece in Hong Kong next year. And she said, Auntie, I'm not sure where we're going to eat, though. There's lots of fried chicken feet and lots of lots of meats. So we haven't. We that's going to be a challenge in Hong Kong. But in the UK, we're getting a lot more progressive now, and we're getting a lot more vegan restaurants. I believe in some states in Florida there are. In America there are. Not perhaps the Midwest or southern states where they still do cattle rearing, but California and Florida. They're getting more progressive there. I'm not sure about South Africa, Tercia.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you to, well, maybe comment more. So I follow Alex O'Connor, the Cosmic Skeptic. And of course, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Alex, I can't hear you very well. Tercia, sorry.
John, can you...
you have to turn Tercia up, John. I can't hear her.
Is that better?
Oh, that's better.
Okay. All right. So So are you familiar with Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, check out his YouTube channel. He's also a very strong vegan. He's actually a vegan activist. He's a young guy. Well, I'm young compared to John, but that's all relative. But so it's interesting to me that where and how one grows up has such an influence, because being South African and growing up in a rural town, the annual slaughter of a cow to stock up your fridge for the winter was something that I grew up with. I mean, I have to confess, I never witnessed the killing of the actual animal, and I think paradoxical, this whole thing about killing animals, because I don't like seeing animals being killed. It's terrible. I mean, I've been on hunting trips, not shooting myself, but I've seen wild buck, springbok and impala being shot and hunted, and I eat the meat. But I have such an ambivalence about the fact that I eat meat, and I'm 100% with you about being vegan, and I've said myself that I'm actually a hypocrite for not going vegan, and I think I'm being hypocritical because it's a deep philosophical issue, because I'm a cat lover. Well, I love all animals, but I'm particularly a cat. I have 4 cats at the moment. One that I'm still Well, Bob started eating on his own this week, but I've bottle fed and fostered kittens, and I would not dream of seeing any of them harmed in any way. I mean, I catch street cats, and I have them spayed and neutered, and but that's just because they're cats, and I grew up that cats are pets, but cows are there to drink the milk, and I have this massive ambivalence, and I wonder how many people actually have this ambivalence about how we use other sentient species for something that we like, and but we're not willing to recognize. I mean, I'm recognizing that I'm feeling ambivalent, and I know it's actually not right. But then I think, well, John, go ahead.
I want to come in here with an alternative view, because speaking as a retired biology teacher, science teacher, mostly biology, I know that we are evolved to be omnivores. Our digestive
system. I'm so sorry. Could I interrupt you? I can't hear you very well again. You are, Tercy. You're very faint. I'm trying to turn my iPad up, but it's not making any difference. I want to make sure I can hear you and respond to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just adjusting your sound too, because you keep going blurry. That's the thing with iPads. They seem to do that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can make me louder. 1 minute.
Can you hear me clearly?
No, I'm on maximum volume. I can't go any louder.
Oh, that's odd. And my iPad seems to be on maximum volume, I think. And I'm just going to put my glasses on and just double check here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's maximum volume.
I'll try and speak louder.
Thank you.
Okay. So, speaking as a retired biology teacher, I know that we have evolved to be omnivores. And the adaptations of our digestive system, our alimentary canal, are definitely, I'm not going to use the word designed, intended to eat different types of food. And the reason for this is plant material is very dilute nutrition. It's mostly water, about 90%. Some plants are 95 or 99% water. And what isn't water, the next most significant ingredient is cellulose, And mammals cannot produce an enzyme that will digest cellulose, so they have to have what's the word? I can't. Commensal bacteria. They have to host bacteria somewhere in their gut, because some bacteria can produce cellulase, which will render cellulose edible, nutritional, and that's why the herbivores have various adaptations. For example, a cow and a horse and an elephant, they have an enormous stomach which acts like a fermentation vessel because of all the bacteria that it needs to contain to digest the very dilute nutrition of grass and straw. And other variants on this theme include rabbits, for example, who obviously don't have a very large stomach, but they do have a propensity to eat their own poo. So the food actually goes through them once, comes out green and is still edible, but it needs another trip through their alimentary canal in order for all the nourishment to be obtained. And there are other variations on that theme. Some animals have a multi-stage stomach, like the cow, for example, where what happens in that case is they eat the food, goes down to the first stomach, but then they bring it back up and give it another chew because it's so indigestible in order to make it palatable for later stages of their alimentary canal. So we're not like that. We don't have those adaptations. And that enables us to be omnivorous. We can eat more or less anything, like rats can. And so it is arguable that that's been a tremendous advantage to our species, and without which, and without having developed cooking in the early stages of our evolution, we wouldn't be who we are today, because we have this enormous energy demanding brain, which also demands a lot of fat, which is not very prevalent in many plants. So by refusing to eat the stuff which enabled us to be what we are, that's the hypocrisy, if you like. We're denying our heritage. And I've nearly finished my little rant on this, but there's a couple of other points I want to raise. Bear in mind, first of all, that anybody has autonomy over their body. They can put into their mouths whatever they like. And that's a given. I'm not preaching to anybody to force them to think differently about their diet. You feel free to eat what you like, guys. But I'm just explaining why I think that vegetarianism is really a privilege of the rich, because in a lot of countries, the special parts of plants that you need to have a good diet as a vegetarian, the cereal grains, the pulses, the nuts, the high protein parts of the plant, they're simply not available. And rice, for example, lacks a number of nutrients. So in order to have a balanced diet in parts of the world where the plants, you can't go into Sainsbury's and buy a bag of peanuts, those parts of the world, you need to eat a goldfish a day in order to have a properly balanced diet.
Can I ask Linda something? Linda, can I ask you?
Yes.
If you knew, what bothers me about eating meat is the inhumanity of factory farming. Yeah. And then that goes for milk, and that can go for eggs. So if you knew, for example, free range eggs, where would you have a problem with that? Or, for example, when I grew up, my grandmother had a farm, and we had cows on the farm, and we would, I think there were 4 or 5. It wasn't a dairy. There were 4 or 5 cows, and they were like part of the family. And we would go out and milk them in the mornings, and we'd have fresh milk. The calves weren't taken away from the mothers. So there was nothing inhumane about drinking the milk of that cow. Do you think if you knew that the produce, and then obviously meat is different because you have to actually kill the animal.
Only at the moment. Soon we'll have synthetic meat. It's already available, but not competitive at the moment.
Yeah, no, I understand the question.
So if you knew that there was humane farming, in terms of dairy and eggs and non-meat products, would that be all right with you?
No, I couldn't eat it. I still couldn't eat it because I'm appalled by the concept of animal produce generally. But it would be far less awful, of course, if the animals weren't tortured and treated inhumanely. And John, coming back to what you said, there are so many issues you've raised there. I'm going to try, if I may, and cover each one of them.
Okay.
Firstly, I don't think it's hypocritical to deny or to refuse to eat meat. I don't think it's hypocritical at all. I think it's the only human and morally right thing to do.
Well, Linda, sorry, I wasn't saying. I was saying that I think I am hypocritical for eating meat.
Oh. No, you did, Kirsty, but John said he felt it was hypocritical.
No, I think, maybe it was a misunderstanding. Okay.
No.
Can I explain what I meant by that? I meant that vegetarians are denying their heritage.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, but I don't think that's correct. Because we evolve, John, don't we? We evolve, and at one time we may have had to, and some people, I appreciate this argument, I'll come back to it, do have to eat meat because there's nothing else to eat. But we have evolved as civilized human beings, but I don't feel some of us have evolved enough. Now, yes, we have got the luxury in Western countries to choose not to eat meat. And I do fully accept that there are some people who have very little option.
Yes.
But as for the biology, John, you're a biology teacher and I'm not, and I wouldn't dream of trying to raise serious biological responses because I'm not in a position to. All I can say is I do know that we don't. Well, my understanding is it takes meat a lot longer to get through our system, and I know that, for example, we don't have the teeth to go and rip rabbits to death if we wanted to. But my feeling is that we have gradually evolved and we did things in the past that we don't do anymore. We don't, well, that's another subject, but we don't do slavery anymore as a general concept. We used to do bear baiting and think that was acceptable. We used to burn witches and dunk witches we thought was acceptable. So we have evolved. And my position is even though our bodies can tolerate eating meat and fish, even though they can tolerate it, I would like us to move on morally and ecologically so that we don't eat meat. That's what I would like to see, even though I accept that we can. And I would like to cover one other thing, and it goes back to Tersi's point as well. And this is a very interesting concept that you may not have be familiar with. But it's my view that when we come on to religion, I'll explain, I've got strong feelings about indoctrination. I feel that most people have a religious persuasion because they're indoctrinated into it. They have very little choice. If for young children, they've been brought up in a certain way. It is my view that the same thing happens with meat. Now, if children were brought up, like my two children were brought up, I was vegetarian, although my husband at the time did eat meat, there was no meat in the house. They've both subsequently become vegan. They're both very healthy with it as well. But if we were all born into a vegan household, can you imagine? And then 10 years later, somebody from another community came along and said, look, have a look at this. Shall we slaughter this beautiful animal, skin him, fry the flesh? Should we take out his liver and shall we saute it? We would be utterly appalled. Children would be utterly appalled at that concept.
Well, maybe
indeed I am. But most children aren't born like that. Most children are brought up like I was, to be fair, to think that meat eating is acceptable. And so, of course, and Tersi, that's what you're saying. I understand your position, but you were brought up, especially in South Africa. I understand
Yes.
that. You were brought up thinking meat eating is acceptable, morally acceptable.
Yeah.
And of course you're going to think it is. So I understand that. It makes sense to me.
I want to tell you about when I was in South Africa some years ago, and my host, who was in Sandton, which I see in the news, is expecting riots this weekend.
Okay.
Thanks to the, what is it? LBTQ plus Pride march, the parade.
Yeah.
And ISIS wants to stop it.
Yes. But when I was there, I was taken to a restaurant and I chose to have the steak, and I was presented with a plate and a large piece of steak. And normally in this country you'd get some chips and salad or something. But so I was expecting some accompaniment. So I said to the waiter, "Can I have something to go with this?" And he brought me some giblets.
I had my worst nightmare.
So I had a meal of meat with a side meal of meat.
Well, there's a saying in South Africa that a balanced meal is a lamb chop in one hand and a pork chop in the other.
Oh my God! And John,
I'm so sorry, I'm upsetting you, Linda. But it's
well.
But
John
what you say
mentioned
is
a little
true.
while ago the plant-based products that look like meat. Now,
Yes.
I tell you what, you might think this is funny. I can't eat those because psychologically, they do. I can't remember what it's called, but it sort of looks like bacon strips.
Yes.
And and they do sausages. Now, both of my kids can eat those, funnily enough.
Yes.
Or kids, they're grown women now.
Yes,
I can't, because to me, I pick it up and think, oh no, it looks too much like bacon. It looks
too
too
realistic.
much like a sausage. And I can't eat it. But I tell you what I do think that's a good idea for those meat eaters who are trying to give it up, who like the taste. I think it's a very good thing for them, more than for people who eat plant-based. So I would rather my food didn't look like meat.
Yes,
So
I see. So you'd be okay.
Understand it.
Are you okay with smoky bacon crisps?
No, definitely not. I would never eat anything with any meat product in.
I would go meat. I would go vegetarian or even vegan, quite easily. I would feel morally better. But what you say about indoctrination is very true, because I watched one particular video of Alex O'Connor's, this cosmic skeptic, and there were very graphic images of factory farming, and it upset me so much that the next morning, when my husband said, "Do we have any bacon?" I said, "Well, I'm not having any." But and then he sort of said to me, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I watched this video and I've discussed it with my family, including my parents, and they all looked at me and said, 'Oh, come on, you're really taking this too far now. Just get over yourself.'" There's definitely an element of really don't be woke. And the other thing that I have to just, John mentioned it, in South Africa, vegan products are extremely expensive. I mean, meat isn't exactly cheap, but vegan products are still more expensive than meat in a country like mine, and where, for example, chicken is quite cheap. So where most people in South Africa, I have to say, don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They live maize meal and chicken feet and chicken giblets and offal, what would be sold as offal in other countries. I think there needs to be I do think there needs to be a conversation about this. But there's many things we need to have conversations about. But I'm very ambivalent. I feel like a hypocrite because I know it's very cruel, and I love animals, and I think animals are sentient beings. I think they have consciousness, and I think they can suffer. And for me to partake in their flesh, while I know, so I know, I'm aware. To me, I'm only speaking for myself. I'm aware of the fact that I just put that, uh, I put that to one side and I block it off. There's a cognitive dissonance um, for me personally when it comes to eating meat. And part of it is because I was indoctrinated into it being perfectly normal, nothing wrong with it. In fact, really, what's your problem? Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. I really do understand that. And your point about poverty and people not being able to afford it, I'm totally with you on that. In fact, I abhor poverty, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful that it's permitted to go on so long. And there's such a diversity between the wealthy and those who are really suffering. It's absolutely disgraceful. That's,
And
well, I was going to say it's a whole nother subject, but that's why I'm such an anti-monarchist. In my country, you appreciate
oh, I
well,
like that. Tell us
because
more about that. An
well,
anti-monarchist.
well, yes, and the main reason is because of the immense wealth of our royal family, absolute immense wealth. They have hundreds of millions of pounds in money, in property, in valuables. And the fact that they can remain there, they're not democratically elected, remember. So putting aside the lack of democracy for a moment, they live in this wealth with palaces all over the place. And even if they were to sell one palace, then several 100,000 people could eat for a week. It's absolutely disgraceful, and I don't know
Well,
how they sleep at night.
Linda, that's interesting because uh, obviously I don't live in a country that has a monarchy. But just tonight at the dinner table, we had a discussion about Elon Musk and wealth. When it actually, I am in my heart, I think I would be more of a socialist possibly. But is it only with the monarchy that you have this problem that they're so wealthy? Because I personally think it's obscene that somebody who plays tennis earns enough to run a small country in and golfers, and that you have people who are obscenely wealthy. I mean, I always ask myself, how many pairs of shoes can any one person wear at any time? I mean, you can only wear one pair of shoes. Why do you need designer shoes? And this whole thing of consumerism. I think the problem is bigger than the monarchy. I think the problem is obscene wealth. What would you say to that, John?
Yeah.
I'm tired of looking at my own face. You have to stop. Take me away.
No. I couldn't agree with you more, Tercia. It's obscene. And what I can't get my head around is why people like Elon Musk, who I think is ghastly as well. Sorry, Elon. I can't understand how he can not have some sense of morality and some sense of wanting to give back. I think it's obscene as well. The only difference I would say, Tercia, between him and other people who are obscenely wealthy is that they, most of them, have done something for it, even if we think they get paid over the top. He did, I believe, make his own money. The only difference with royalty is they didn't do anything. They happened to be born into a family that was undemocratically chosen, and through that family they inherit vast amounts of wealth, and that's the only difference. Plus, I feel they have they should have more of a moral responsibility to their countrymen and those people who they are supposed to serve. But I agree with the general concept. I hate obscene wealth. And I would like to think that if I was in that fortunate position of having a lot of money, I'd like to do something with it to benefit people. I can't understand why these folks don't.
Girls, monarchy is a whole new show.
Yeah.
and obscene wealth, that's something else too. While we've got you, and before we run out of our hour, can I push you on to talking about your experience with Christianity, Linda? Because I know you've got something to say about that too.
Sure, John. Well, always, since being a child, my parents weren't religious. And although I did go to a C of E school, that was only because it was the only local school.
Yeah.
I always felt it was a load of nonsense. Even as a child, I just couldn't see that. I thought it was nonsensical. And I didn't honestly give it very much thought. I found it annoying and illogical, but I didn't give it a great deal of thought. Obviously, throughout the years, I've seen the hypocrisy of religious people, and I see the nonsense, and I see people giving money to churches, and when they can ill afford to do it. But it was only well, actually a couple of decades ago, to be fair, that I had a personal experience of it via my sister. Now, my lovely sister, my late sister, I'm afraid she died, and I'll come on to that. Her husband ran off with somebody else, and I hadn't quite appreciated at the time just how vulnerable she was. I'm sure I didn't, looking back. I knew she was upset, of course, but I don't think I'd realised quite how vulnerable, because soon after that, she found God. Now, I believe a lot of
was he under a stone?
Sorry, John. Oh, yes.
Was he under a stone?
No, he wasn't. He was sitting cross-legged on a cloud, actually.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, when she found him. A lot of people, I have noted over the years, find religion when they're very, very vulnerable. So I do very often see them as victims themselves.
Yes.
So she got into the church. Now, unfortunately, the church that she got into was a particularly radical evangelicalist church that I now see is a cult, was a cult and is a cult. And interestingly, a more moderate rector who has been helping the family recently, he himself actually conceded that my sister's ex-church was a cult, which I was very interested. He's a believer, but he felt it was a cult. It was called the Trinity Church in Brentwood, I think is the name of it. Anyway, she joined, and she got really into it. Although she didn't have much money at the time, of course, she went along with the concept that God wanted her to give her 10% of her income. So her state benefit at the time, 10% of it went to the church.
What does God need money for?
Sorry, John?
What does God need money for?
Yeah, I don't know really what he needs. He needs money to give to the priests who abuse the church and run off with the money, actually.
Shall I put my Christian hat on and explain to you? When I wear my Christian hat, I can tell you that it's not God that needs money. The Christians are God's hands on earth.
Right.
And we need to give the money to the Christians so that they can do God's work. Okay, Christian hat off. It's all box.
Well,
so can I just finish on that theme? God creates stuff, doesn't he? Does he have a blind spot about creating money?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think so. Well, unfortunately, the head of her church a few years later, I think his name was Ian Reid. I might be wrong, but I think it was. He was found to have been pocketing all of the money given to the church, including by all his parishioners.
Oh,
and
what
he
a
ran off with it.
Me?
Can you believe it? A religious hypocrite who's
What a surprise.
Shocking, eh? Who would have guessed it?
I'm stunned.
So, yes, absolutely stunned. No child abuse in this particular instance, but
Not
yes.
that you know of.
None that's come to light at the moment. But anyway, she still stayed with the church, the same church, and they got a new rector. I don't know what he does. I don't know whether he's honest or not. Anyway, she stayed with the church. She met somebody else who was a very vulnerable man, another parishioner, very vulnerable man living in pretty much a one-bedroom squat. She married him, and he came to live with her in her house, and they stayed married until her recent death. Now, he was even more indoctrinated than she was. He was a very, very, and still is a very vulnerable person, a person who can't really cope with life generally. And unfortunately, my niece and nephew were quite young at the time, and unfortunately, he, with my sister's support, tried to indoctrinate the children, made their life quite difficult, wouldn't let them listen to pop music because it made God very unhappy, and they should listen to biblical music instead. And my sister, who was the most loving, wonderful, caring woman, when it came to religion, she was totally blinded, and she allowed this to happen. In fact, on her deathbed, strangely enough, she did voice a regret about that, oddly enough. Anyway, this went on for some years, and it caused enormous problems, family problems. She and I couldn't even speak about it because being I'm actually a lawyer as my latest career, and of course, and before that I was a police officer. So my career over the last few decades has been evidence based, and of course, absolutely no evidence for a God. And so of course I can't believe something for which there's no evidence. But my sister, I couldn't speak to her. We just couldn't discuss it in the end. We agreed not to discuss it.
Yeah.
But sadly, she went on from that in the more recent years when with the emergence of QAnon. You know of QAnon, don't you?
Yeah.
The maniacal conspiracy theory group.
Yes.
Mainly in America, but it's really come over to the UK in a big way. Well, I'm afraid, like many right-wing Christian evangelists, she was hooked. She and her husband were hooked and became avid QAnon followers, which again was unbelievable to me. Absolute crazy stuff like 9/11 didn't happen, the Trump election was rigged. I remember her actually sending me a little video, of a lorry backing into an old dingy warehouse and boxes being taken out of this lorry. Now, there was no evidence as to what this was. It could have been toilet rolls being unwrapped. It could have been anything. But she said, no, that is definitely the Trump votes that were concealed from the adjudicator. When I tried to explain, no, sis, there's no evidence of that. It didn't work. Anyway, so Christianity.
There's just boxes.
John, you go first. Linda, I want to ask you something. Can I go? Okay, I'm going ahead. So, something that John and I have spoken about often, and were you only two siblings, Linda? Was it? Did you have other brothers and sisters?
No, just two of us.
It fascinates me. You grew up in the same household. You had the same upbringing, unless I'm mistaken, and yet you had this ability to think things through, to never fall for religion, even as a child, even being exposed to school. And your sister had this propensity, and it's. Would you say that, and with your experience as a police officer and now as a lawyer, would you say that some people are just more inclined to for whatever reasons, be it I'm not sure what the reasons are, but I think it's psychological. I'm more inclined to not see things for what they are, or maybe they can live with more cognitive dissonance. Would you say it's something like that? What's your opinion about that?
It's a good point. I think some people are more vulnerable generally in life. Some people just don't think things through, and some people just choose to believe things. Now, that's not my sister. She genuinely believed it. But many people admit that there's no evidence, but they choose to believe. They call it faith. Well, faith is a concept that is there when there's no evidence because it's a choice. And if somebody doesn't mind whether what they believe is true or not, then go for it. But I couldn't do that. But my sister wasn't in that category. But to be fair, Tersia, I've got two beautiful daughters, both highly intelligent professional women, but they're completely different, brought up in the same house. Completely different in many, many ways. So I don't think it's that unusual, perhaps.
But are they religious, though? Are they religious?
Oh, no, goodness me. No, I'd be mortified if they were. No.
It's not about. So something that fascinates me is the propensity to have belief in a supernatural being. I mean, I've got 3 children myself, and I'm one of 4 siblings, and wouldn't say we had the same mom and dad. And even my 3 kids, if I didn't know that I had all 3 of them with the same person, I was, where do they come from? So that's very individual. But it's, I find it interesting. And with my 3 children, is she has a propensity to want to believe in something supernatural. See, she doesn't believe in God, but she has told me that she wants to believe that there's something out there that takes care of her. Whereas my 2 boys, they like, if God existed and he wants us to believe in him, why doesn't he just come down and say, I'm God, I want you to believe in me? And they were raised exactly the same way. So I do think that some people have, I like the word vulnerability that you've used, because I think we're all vulnerable in different ways, but I think some people have a vulnerability. It's like a weak spot in their armor. And they more, like some people are more prone to getting strokes or having heart disease. Maybe some people are just psychologically more prone to fall for conspiracy theories. And that's why I think we need to have discussions like these to warn people, like we warn them, don't smoke because it causes lung cancer or cancer. And don't eat meat because it makes animals
makes animals dead. Yeah.
That too.
So this is an interesting subject. I've had 2 families, and I've had 2 boys. They were both very different, and I've now got 2 girls who are both very different. One's introverted, the other's extroverted, and the thing is, there's such a thing as variation. When you shuffle the genes together, out comes an entirely new hand. It's, if you think of playing cards as the analogy. And the thing that you said earlier, Linda, about being vulnerable and therefore being what you might call easy meat for the priests and pastors. I got the vegetarian connection in there as well. The thing is that they know that, don't they? The religious leaders know, and they go and fish in the pond where people are vulnerable, like at hospital, in prison, at hospices, anywhere that they know that people are feeling in need of something.
And on that point, John, I only recently, a couple of years ago, realised that AA, the alcoholic group in our country, in Turkey, Alcoholics Anonymous, they are Christian based. And I didn't even know that until a friend of mine who works for the Samaritans charity, she told me that they're not allowed to refer people to AA because it's a religion based group.
That's right.
And so, of course, they're catching people at their very lowest. So that's a good example of vulnerability. And going back to Tersia's point as well, as people wanting something, I genuinely do understand why people would look for some sort of comfort blanket. For example, joining a church. Yes, it's a community. Yes, it might be a corrupt community with ridiculous beliefs, but it's still a community of people. So I do understand why people would want that. I'd rather they go and join a table tennis club. Me too. I do understand that. Why you want to believe it. I want to believe in something.
This shows up both geographically and historically, because the places where religions are most prevalent are the places where people are nearly starving. And they need salvation. And historically, if you look back at the history of this country, for example, when we were not very well provided for, the church had a good hold. But as we've become more prosperous, so their congregations have dwindled.
Yeah, absolutely. And in ignorant communities, and I use that not as a detrimental term, I can hardly believe that they would say, for example, God, please don't let this hurricane come. I say hurricane because in Cayman they have lots of God, please don't let this hurricane come. And please don't let anyone die. So obviously God chooses to ignore that. So God makes a hurricane calm. 100 people die and one person's saved, and
Yes.
they will say, "Thank God for
Yes.
saving
me." Yeah,
John."
and
It's so absurd.
And not all these other 99 bodies around me.
No.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
or something like somebody recently said actually to me, you know, God was really on my side. God really helped me with a personnel problem I was having in the office. There was this ghastly woman, and he took her away and he put her in a different department. And I thought, I'd resist saying it, it's a good job that God cares more about your personnel difficulty than the millions of starving people in the world. That's pretty handy, isn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Pretty handy. Crazy stuff.
Linda, I'm curious about your sister's children. What happened to them? Or what are they doing? I just, because I have this very keen interest in indoctrination of children, and because I think children are vulnerable, and that's something that I'm very, very strongly against. I think children should be taught how to think, not what to think.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Well, my sister. Oh yes, I should tell you. So my sister, my lovely, beautiful sister, being crazy Christian and then a crazy QAnon follower, I'm afraid it caused such problems with her children, my niece and nephew, that at one stage they became estranged, completely estranged, because it was bad enough with the religion, and then with the QAnon rubbish on top, they couldn't cope with it. And her son, my nephew, remained estranged to her death. Sadly, her daughter, my niece, my lovely niece, they did manage to get back together before my sister's death, but it's very hard. And I'll come on to them now if I may in a moment. But because of those connections, her Christian and QAnon connections, my sister, who was diabetic, should have got a COVID vaccination.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you know, but diabetic people are very much more prone to have serious illness or die with COVID.
And she didn't.
Yeah, they are, and it was very important that she got a COVID jab. But because of the Christianity and QAnon, my sister absolutely refused the jab. She thought it was the devil, probably the devil, but it wasn't the devil. It was certainly somebody trying to inject her with some sort of transmitter from China, some crazy QAnon nonsense, and she refused the jab. Well, in January this year, and I was actually in Cayman at the time, she caught COVID in a very short, in England she was, in a very short time she was intubated in intensive care. And a few weeks later, she was virtually dead. Her body had collapsed down to nothing, pretty much. The doctors wanted to turn the machines off, and my crazy brother-in-law just exacerbated our grief by refusing initially, on the basis that God might choose to save my sister at the last minute. The doctors took over in the end and turned the machines off, and then my sister died. So he played, I'm executor of her will, he played me up a lot at first, but anyway, we're sorting that now. My niece and nephew, my lovely niece and nephew, I'm trying to keep an eye on them. My niece is in Hong Kong. She teaches there, actually. She's a Spanish and a French teacher. And my nephew's in New Zealand, so they're miles away, I'm afraid. But I speak to I'm speaking to them both because I'm trying to sell their mum's house for them. I'm selling it. My niece I'm particularly closer to. They have definitely been traumatized by this. They, as well as being desperately sad that their mums died, of course, prematurely. She was only 62. She died prematurely, but they still have the after effects and the trauma of growing up in a manically religious family. And that's something that they need, and they have done, and taken some, I know my niece has taken some therapy for, and they'll probably need a lot more of it, because you've got that, not only the awful trauma and the consequences, but then you've got the awfulness of losing your mum prematurely. So they've suffered greatly as a result of religion and QAnon. It's just pure wickedness.
I want to say I'm so sorry for your loss, and
Absolutely.
It just makes me realize once again, I've often been criticized because I've often been called a militant atheist, and I've been called
You'll get there.
too outspoken, even by people who agree with me. Even by atheists in my family who will say, just leave it. Just why do you have to be an activist? Let people believe what they want to believe. And your story is just another example of bad beliefs destroy people's lives.
Yes.
I mean, it's not to say that your sister wouldn't have gotten ill, but there's a reasonable chance that if she had gotten the jab, she would have had a limited chance.
Yes,
and it's my opinion that QAnon is very much harder to fall for if you're not religious.
Yes.
Atheists believe nonsense too. It's not as if atheists are above believing nonsense, but QAnon and fundamentalist evangelical faith goes hand in hand.
Yes.
And the destruction wreaked. So if anybody asks me, why can't you just let people believe what they want to believe? I will just refer them to this video and say, because it kills people.
Yes. Absolutely.
And that's why I'm more than prepared to talk about my sister and the grief, because if it can just help one family, it's worth it, isn't it?
Yes. So, people, don't believe nonsense. Be critical thinkers. And on that sort of semi-dark note, I'm going to wind the show up. I want to tell everybody that we don't actually have a fixed guest for next week yet, but I am scheming to get two people together, a psychiatrist in California and an anthropologist in New York, to discuss things like this: how we form beliefs, whether we can be influenced easily one way or another. So watch us again next week. Linda, you have been fantastic, as I knew you would. Thank you very much. Tercia, thank you for your help too. And thank you, viewers, both present and future, for joining in and watching. Say bye-bye.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.